Exodus 31, start in verse 13. This is God speaking. Speak thou also unto the children of Israel, saying, Verily my Sabbaths ye shall keep, for it is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I am the Lord that doth sanctify you. Go down to verse 17. It is a sign between me, God, the Lord, it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. And if you read Genesis 2, verse 3, he sanctified the seventh day. He blessed it. And the blessing has never been taken off of that day. I've asked before, I'll ask again, and there'll be no answer, because everybody knows the blessing won't be taken off. The blessing hasn't been taken off that day, nor will it. If you go to Isaiah 66, verse 23, this is speaking of a future time. Read verse 22. Let's start in verse 22. For as the new heavens and the new earth which I will make shall remain before me, saith the Lord, so shall your seed and your name remain. Here's verse 23. Has this happened yet? And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sunday to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. No, I'm sorry, I misread that on purpose. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me, saith the Lord. Saith the Lord. So we know it's going to be kept in the future. We know the blessing was put on a day and was never taken off of it. And we see God saying it is a sign between him and his people. Ezekiel 20, verse 12. Moreover also I, the Lord, gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between me and them, that they might know that I am the Lord that sanctify them. Go down to verse 20. And hallow my Sabbaths, and they shall be a sign between me and you, that you may know that I am the Lord your God. God does nothing in vain. He does nothing for no good purpose. Why did he say that? It clearly is a sign. Why do you suppose that nobody ever says, you're not committing adultery, you're trying to earn your salvation, or you're not killing, you're not coveting, you're trying to earn salvation, you're trying to do it by works? Nobody ever says that. But if you keep the Sabbath, you may hear that. I've heard it. Some of you have heard it. One person has said repeatedly, I don't care if people keep the Sabbath. It's just when they tell others they have to keep it. I don't believe that. The reason it bothers some people is because when they see people keeping the Sabbath, even if they don't tell others they must, just seeing other people obeying God bothers their conscience, because it's a reminder to them that despite what their pastor says, that they're really not obeying God fully. You could quietly, humbly keep the Sabbath. It is still going to bother some people. It's a reminder of their disobedience. I never go against other people's religious tweets and criticize them. You never see me do that. The only time I even debate is if someone comes against one of my tweets. But people have a right to believe what they want. I don't think I'm better than anybody else, even if they keep a different day. Who am I that I have to go harass people that honestly think differently? It doesn't bother me if other people think differently. But it does bother people. If you keep the Sabbath, it will bother some, because it's a reminder to them that despite what they think, they're not really obeying God. That's how it's a sign. It shows who will obey God in the face of ridicule, in the face of the masses going the other way, who will obey God on the one hand, and who will obey statements of men such as this. Christians must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath, but must work on that day, rather honoring the Lord's day, and if they can, resting then as Christians. But if any shall be found to be Judaizers, let them be anathema from Christ. That was the Roman Church's Council of Laodicea around 364 AD. That's Canon 29. So God says you must rest on the Sabbath. Man says you must not Judaize by resting on the Sabbath. By the way, when they say honoring the Lord's Day, the Lord's Day of Revelation 1 verse 10 is referring to the day of the Lord. It's not referring to a Sunday or a Sabbath. If you, for example, if you go to Zephaniah 1 verse 14, it mentions the day of the Lord. And verse 15 says, quote, that day is a day of wrath. Revelation 6 verse 17 also calls it the great day of his wrath. If you compare Revelation 6 verse 12, the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became blood. Compare that's Revelation 6, verse 12, with Joel 2, verse 31. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. If you also compare Joel 2, verse 11, For the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, and who can abide it? Compare that with Revelation 6, verse 17. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? Anybody honestly looking at Joel and Zephaniah and Revelation knows that Revelation 1, verse 10 is referring to the day of the Lord, the day when God comes to punish the wicked. It's the great day of his wrath, you see. But as I said, the Sabbath is a sign because it will show those who will obey God's command that he literally spoke and wrote, and those who will obey Canon 29 of the Council of Laodicea of the Roman Church, or what the Roman Emperor Constantine said around 321 AD this is Constantine, his Day of the Sun edict, quote, on the venerable day of the sun, let the magistrates and people residing in cities rest, and let all workshops be closed. So yes, it is a sign between those who will obey God and those who will not. If Christ was going to do away with the need to keep the Sabbath, which would be odd because we know he was the I am, he was the one who spoke it. Before Abraham was, I am. And I think if you read is it Exodus 3, verse 14, where the Lord refers to himself as I am? But why would Christ get rid of the need to keep the Sabbath? We all know it's going to be kept again, according to Isaiah 66, because he didn't. What commandment did he spend more time talking about? The Sabbath. Does that make sense if it was going to be done away with? No, it does not make sense at all. And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered. And they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? That they might accuse him. That's Matthew 12, verse 10. And he said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. An answer that makes absolutely no sense if he was going to do away with the need to keep it. He spent more time talking about the Sabbath than the other commands in the Gospels. He showed that it's lawful to do well on the Sabbath, which one shows that, well, the big point here to realize is why bother about talking what is lawful to do on a day that's going to be done away? He is showing here quite clearly that what is lawful on the Sabbath does matter. Doing good is okay on the Sabbath. That means two things here. One, it's okay to do good on the Sabbath. And two, what is lawful to do on the Sabbath still matters. Christ didn't say, just have love, it doesn't matter what day you keep. That's ludicrous to think otherwise. God doesn't make mistakes. He blessed a certain day. He said to keep a certain day. He said to remember a certain day. And it's not a surprise that the masses will not keep that day. While I'm on the topic, the Sabbath begins at sunset on Friday and ends at sunset on Saturday. If you read Nehemiah 13, verse 19, and go read it in many translations, this is the Holman Christian Standard Bible. When shadows began to fall on the gates of Jerusalem just before the Sabbath, I gave orders that the gates be closed and not open until after the Sabbath. I posted some of my men at the gates so that no goods could enter during the Sabbath day. That is Nehemiah 13, verse 19. Luke 4, verse 40. Now when the sun was setting, all they that had... The screen moved. Now when the sun was setting, all they that had any sick with divers diseases brought them unto him. And he laid his hands on every one of them and healed them. Now if you read Luke 13, you could see where the ruler of the synagogue said in verse 14, he chided the Son of God for healing someone. If you saw Jesus heal somebody, wouldn't your reaction be, wow, praise God, I should maybe listen to him? My reaction wouldn't be to correct him, but the ruler of the synagogue said, there are 6 days in which men ought to work. In them, therefore, come and be healed, and not on the Sabbath day. That was Luke 13, verse 14. So that's why if you read Luke 4, verse 40, they waited until the sunset, because they believed that the Sabbath began and ended at sunset. Let's make this simple. We see of the religious leaders criticizing Christ and his disciples for healing on the Sabbath, for plucking grain and eating on the Sabbath. If they were keeping a different time of day, they would have tried to stone him. They would have tried to stone Paul. There is no record in this book of the Pharisees and there's no record in this book of the religious leaders having a debate, a contention, an argument with Christ or with Paul for keeping a different reckoning of the Sabbath. Everybody knows that the Jews back then kept sunset to sunset, just like they do today. There's no records of the Church of God throughout history keeping any other reckoning of the Sabbath except sunset to sunset. And this is the question that those who believe the day begins at dawn don't even try to answer. They don't. Why is there no record of a dispute between Christ and Paul on the one hand and the religious leaders on the other hand? Everybody knows the Jewish religious leaders kept sunset to sunset back then. Nobody has shown in the past 2,000 years where it was changed. Why is there no record of a dispute? Was God trying to keep it a secret to be revealed today in the end time? No, it's ridiculous. Common sense. I don't like to harp on this because I know it offends some, but that's the question nobody can answer that believes the day does not begin at sunset. If Christ and Paul kept a different reckoning from the sunset to sunset Jewish religious leaders, how on earth is there no record of a dispute? Seriously, think about that. Anyway, I've shown you that it is a sign. Now, there is another sign that shows who is Christ's and who is not. You go to Romans 8, verse 9. But ye are not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwell in you. Now, if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he is none of his. You see. So yes, the Spirit of God in you is a seal of who is his and who is not. But in a very real sense, because God said it more than once, it is a sign. The Sabbath does mark you. It does show you, it makes you stand out as one that obeys God despite what everybody else is doing. And by the way, since the Spirit of God is in another sense, a seal of who is his and who is not, only those who obey God get that Spirit. And we are his witnesses of these things. And so also is the Holy Spirit, whom God has given to them that just believe without repenting. No, it says, whom God has given to them that obey him. That's Acts 5, verse 32. I hope I've provoked some thought. Read this book for yourself, please. And, like I said, I'm not going to debate people who want to claim the Sabbath begins at a different time than sunset. Until someone could show me where the record of a vehement argument between Christ and Paul on the one hand and the religious leaders on the other hand, until you could show me where the record of that dispute is, I don't want to hear it. Common sense. The Jews did not all wake up one day and forget what day the Sabbath was. The Church of God did not. We know the Church of God of Paul and the apostles was keeping the Sabbath. In the last 2,000 years, there's no record of them waking up and forgetting what time of day it started. Common sense, please. But the question I want to leave you with, for those who don't want to keep the Sabbath, that don't think we have to, and I'm not judging you, I don't think I'm better than anybody. If you knew me, you would see I'm not better than anybody. Why did God say it's a sign between him and his people? Peace all. Bye-bye.